fast, where truth moves faster than a Holstein calf. No waiting on some pretty page. We're charting new ground in the digital age. From genomic codes to row-wide facts, we cut through the noise, no holding back. Not your daddy's dairy news tonight. We're sparking debates with every insight. The ring's not where the real fight's at. It's in the data, in the channel chat. From pasture to processor to your morning cup, we're raising the stakes. Try and get ahead of herd. Yeah! Where the future's more than just a word. Ahead of herd. Come on! The bullvine's calling, let your voice be heard.
Welcome back to the Bullvine Podcast, where we cut through dairy industry noise to get you the insights that actually matter for your operation. We are here today to challenge, well, what you think you know about dairy survival.
And today, we're diving deep into a feature piece that's got some serious buzz across the industry. This has got layers that'll make every farmer rethink their approach to farm survival and, profitability. We are talking about market leverage and why being the most efficient dairy producer, well, it might not save your farm anymore.
That is the cold, hard reality. And frankly, it's just frustrating. For decades, the mantra we all learned was pretty simple. Improve genetics, watch your feed conversion, manage tightly, be efficient, and you survive. But those old rules, they are structurally dead. This deep dive into the numbers shows that survival is no longer primarily driven by what happens inside your barn. It's driven by your market power, your access to capital, and frankly, processor influence.
It's the paradox that is tearing the industry apart. And I'll be honest, it keeps me up at night. We all saw the USDA statistic from back in February 2024. That number is absolutely chilling. 1,500 U.S. dairy farms closed in 2023 alone.
1,500. Just let that sink in. That's a huge number of legacy operations just disappearing.
Exactly. And yet, national milk production actually ticked higher. That single statistic should be an immediate deafening alarm bell for every single operator out there. If 1,500 of your neighbors close up shop and the overall supply doesn't even dip, that tells you something fundamental about the structure of the business. The volume lost was just. It was instantaneously absorbed by the remaining much larger players. It's a consolidation machine that eats volume for breakfast.
And that paradox, losing farms while gaining production, that is the core issue we're tackling here. It proves that simply being a good farmer, having great cows, or even improving your herd health, it doesn't matter if your cost structure is structurally disadvantaged. We need a new playbook because the deck is, it's stacked against the mid-size and the small producer.
I completely agree. And we have to challenge the sacred cows today. We're going to discuss the massive, unavoidable cost of production disparity between herd sizes, which just feels inherently unfair. We're also going to look squarely at the built-in co-op conflict of interest and why transparency in milk checks is now more important than ever. Here's where it gets really interesting, because the data confirms what farmers have suspected for a decade. The playing field isn't just tilted, it's structurally engineered to favor massive scale.
Okay, let's unpack this hard reality with the cold numbers, showing exactly how that playing field has tilted. The 2022 census of agriculture data is really the foundation of this whole conversation. It's stark.
Stark is an understatement. It makes you feel like you're trying to compete in a game where half the rules, especially the favorable ones, they only apply to the big guys.
Here is the key data point defining the new normal. 65% of all American milk now comes from just 8% of herds. And that's the population of herds with over 1,000 cows. Just think about that concentration for a moment. 2/3 of the supply is controlled by fewer than 1 in 10 dairy operations. That gives them unparalleled leverage over the commodity price itself.
And then you look at the other side of the ledger, which is where most of our listeners sit, especially the traditional dairy regions, like the Northeast and the Midwest. Conversely, 9 out of 10 farms, the 100 to 500 CAD group, which used to be the industry standard, they only account for about 22% of the total supply. That disproportion is just enormous. It means the majority of producers are constantly fighting for a shrinking piece of the pie, while the base price is effectively set by the operational giants who dominate that other 65%.
That's the definition of a structural concentration. And this isn't just theory. This is what's driving farm closures. We heard that powerful anecdote from a third-generation Wisconsin farmer that really stuck with me. He said, "I remember 13 dairies in our road, but now it's just us." And the tragic part is that many of the folks who exited were younger managers who had poured everything into modernization, not just retirees hanging up their boots.
Right. They weren't inefficient. They were probably fantastic managers, well-educated, great with herd health and genetics. But they simply couldn't make the math work against that structural weight. When you're in a market where the price is driven by massive volume operations that have cost structures you can never achieve, just being good isn't good enough anymore. It's a profitability ceiling you hit because of scale, not because of management.
And we have the precise numbers on the cost of production, or COP, difference, thanks to the Cornell Dairy Farm Business Summary from 2022. This is the core data point that should shake everyone. We really need to explain this in detail. COP is simply what it costs you per hundredweight to produce the milk before you factor in any profit.
So give us the pain point. Let's break down where this massive cost differential actually comes from.
The largest herds, the over 1,000 cow operations, they report a cost of production somewhere between $22 and $24 per hundredweight. They have massive buying power and amortization. Now, look at the benchmark for the smaller operations, specifically the 100 to 199 cow group. Their COP range is $31 to $33 per hundredweight.
Wait, did you catch that if you're listening? $31. That's a $7 to $11 per hundredweight gap in cost structure. That is not a marginal difference you can fix by tightening up parlor efficiency. It's the entire margin, and then some, eaten up before you even consider profit.
I mean, where does that $7 to $11 difference actually? Where does it come from?
That's the key question, and we need to elaborate because it's not one single factor. Roughly $2 to $3 of that gap is pure labor efficiency. A 5,000 cow farm can amortize one nutritionist, one HR manager, one equipment maintenance team across 5 times the number of cows as a 1,000 cow farm, and 10 times that of a 500 cow farm. That specialist labor cost per cow just drops exponentially as you grow.
Okay, so that's part of it. What about the other $4 to $8?
That comes down to feed and capital. On feed, as we'll discuss in the next segment, the largest farms aren't just buying better, they're buying cheaper by bypassing middlemen entirely. That's probably $3 to $4 the gap right there.
And the rest. And the remainder is capital and debt service. Because they have better credit access and lower perceived risk, their interest rates are lower, which means the cost of their infrastructure, the barn, the machinery, the parlor, it's spread over more milk and it's financed cheaper. That amortization advantage is huge. A large farm can run a new mixer wagon for 10 years, amortizing its $200,000 cost over millions of pounds of milk, while a small farm pays the same amount but produces far less volume, driving their capital cost per hundredweight sky high.
And this is all happening in a federally ordered market where the base price is set by regional blends. So whether you're selling 100 hundredweight a day or 10,000 hundredweight a day, you're getting roughly the same base check. If that base check is $20 and your costs are $31, you lose $11 per hundredweight every single day, no matter how good your cows are. It just completely nullifies management skill.
Absolutely. The problem isn't that the smaller farmer is bad at farming. The problem is that their money is hemorrhaging out the door on procurement, finance, and fixed regulatory overhead. Overhead that the large farms simply don't have to worry about at the same proportional weight. We have officially moved the conversation beyond efficiency and straight into market leverage and cost structure.
So let's challenge that conventional wisdom then. When people talk about the big guys being more efficient, they often picture superior barn design or, automated parlors. But the truth, according to the sources, is that much of this so-called efficiency story is purely about procurement power and overhead spread, exactly like you said.
That's the myth we need to bust wide open. It's not necessarily about who feeds the cows better. It's about who buys the feed cheaper and who has the power to negotiate logistics.
Exactly. I spoke to a Central Valley manager who's running 5,000 cows, and his quote just sums up this procurement leverage perfectly. He said, and I'm quoting him here, "We buy grain by the unit train, 110 rail cars."
A unit train, 110 rail cars. I mean, that's not just buying in bulk, that's buying at a foundational logistical level. That's just an overwhelming display of buying power right there.
So what's the specific financial advantage? Their delivered price is CBOT minus basis. Now, for listeners who aren't knee-deep in commodity trading, the CBOT is the Chicago Board of Trade, the standard futures price. Basis is simply the local difference between that futures price and the cash price at your local elevator, accounting for local supply, demand, and transport costs.
So when that 5,000 cow operator buys CBOT minus basis, they are essentially cutting out all the middlemen. The grain elevator margin, the local trucking costs, the storage fees, all gone. They are dealing directly with the market, taking delivery right off the rails.
Precisely. They told us sometimes their final price is 15 cents lower per bushel than the standard elevator price because they eliminate the basis entirely. They become the primary destination.
Okay, now let's talk about the small farm penalty. Compare that unit train buyer to, say, the 300 cow neighbor. They pay the elevator price plus the whole fee plus the elevator's margin. That penalty, according to our source material, is 40 or 50 cents more per bushel compared to the futures price.
So you have the large operation paying 15 cents less than the benchmark, and the small operation paying 40 to 50 cents more. You're talking about a 55 to 65 cent spread on the very same commodity, just because of scale and logistics. If your cows eat 40 pounds of grain a day, and you have 300 cows, that difference on just one commodity is thousands and thousands of dollars a month. That difference alone is the difference between profit and loss.
And the gap just widens when you bring finance into the picture. Access to capital is leveraged by size and perceived stability. Farm Credit's published rates illustrate this financial wedge perfectly. A 2,000 cow herd, because they represent huge, consistent cash flow and are often hedged. They're seeing prime plus 0.5% on their loans. They are rewarded for being large and consistent.
But the 200 cow farm, they might see prime plus 2 or even higher if they've had a few tough years. That is a massive hike in risk perception tacked onto their borrowing costs.
Let's put that into dollar terms for our listeners. Let's assume a farm has $2 million in principal debt, which is not uncommon for a mid-sized operation trying to stay viable. The difference between prime plus 0.5% and prime plus 2% is 1.5%. On a $2 million note, that difference is $30,000 a year in extra interest.
$30,000.
Yeah.
And that $30,000 goes straight out the door every year just for being small. That money could be used to buy a critical piece of used equipment, it could be a full-time hired hand, or it could be profit to pay down equity. That money compounds year after year, widening the equity gap and limiting the ability of the small farm to reinvest or weather a bad price cycle. The difference in their interest rate is an actual physical cost penalty.
And then we have to look at the environmental compliance burden, which is crushing and, frankly, unevenly distributed. We looked at the Wisconsin Department of Ag reports on this, and the numbers are truly shocking. They prove that regulation, while necessary, has become a tool of consolidation.
This is a perfect example of how fixed costs ruin smaller operations. The complexity and fixed costs of compliance, like getting certain water permits, nutrient management plans, or even things like CFO regulations, that's the issue.
For nutrient management, methane compliance modeling, and water permits, the cost comes out to about 50 cents per hundredweight for the largest herds. They can amortize the cost of consultants, permits, and infrastructure upgrades over millions of pounds of milk, making it a manageable operational expense.
But for the smallest operations, that same required paperwork, the specialized hydrological survey, the consultant fees to file the nutrient management plan, the same inspector fee. It costs easily $15 per hundredweight or more. That's astronomical. That's a 30-fold difference in compliance cost.
Yeah.
Can you break down exactly which costs drive that $15 number? Because it sounds impossible.
It's the fixed cost of specialized labor. The state often requires third-party certification or specific engineering plans. So whether you have 200 cows or 5,000, you pay the same $10,000 to $20,000 fee for a hydrological report or a complex permit application. If you produce 1 million pounds of milk, that's $10,000 of fixed cost. If you produce 10 million pounds, it's $1,000 of fixed cost. The smallest producers are paying 10 to 15 times more per pound of milk for the exact same piece of paper, simply because they don't have the volume to spread that cost.
It's an unavoidable financial headwind that has nothing to do with whether their cows are healthy or your fields are managed well. It's just a penalty for lack of scale. So if you're a small operator, you are penalized in 3 major areas that have nothing to do with your farm management: procurement, finance, and regulation. And until you address those leverage gaps, getting a few more pounds of milk out of your cows, it just won't save you.
Let's move into the topic that causes the most friction at industry meetings: vertical integration and the co-op conflict of interest. This is where the game changes fundamentally, because the person buying your milk is no longer just a separate business. They are part of your own organization.
When your co-op starts buying up the processing plants, the dynamic shifts from a partnership to an internal conflict. The biggest move, of course, was Dairy Farmers of America's $425 million purchase of 44 Dean Foods plants after Dean's bankruptcy. That shifted the landscape entirely.
It absolutely did. Industry estimates now suggest that more than half of DFA members' milk flows through DFA-owned plants. This is not a small, independent buyer. This is the farmer's agent now owning the destination of the majority of the milk supply.
And that brings us directly to the built-in conflict. The co-op's original foundational job was to act as the farmer's agent, fighting for the fairest possible farm gate price for their members, essentially collectively bargaining their milk.
But when that co-op owns the processing plant, that original mission collides head-on with the processor's goal, which is fundamentally capitalist.
Yeah.
Keep input costs, which is the raw milk price, as low and steady as possible to maximize the downstream processing margin on cheese, butter, or fluid milk.
That's the classic dilemma. That Cornell Ag Econ professor put it so succinctly. He said, co-ops owning plants face incentives that are tough to align. You can't maximize both farmer pay price and processing margin. It's mathematically impossible. One margin has to give, and, well, guess which one historically takes the hit? The farmer's pay price is the most flexible input cost.
And this leads to transparency issues that are almost impossible for the farmer to penetrate. The research shows that co-ops may have lower stated deductions on the milk check, making the base price look favorable initially.
Right, but then you get into the realm of other deductions, and those can vary wildly within the co-op group, making it incredibly hard to benchmark or challenge. We're talking about things like capital retains, specific hauling surcharges, marketing assessments, and quality premiums that suddenly disappear. It's opaque by design, or at least opaque by organizational complexity that shields the final net pay price from easy comparison.
Think about the core question. If your co-op owns the plant, is the negotiation truly across the table a buyer facing a seller demanding fair market value? Or is it just across the hallway? An internal accounting discussion designed to balance the organization's overall profitability. The lack of clear external transparency makes leverage impossible for the individual farmer.
It completely undermines the farmer's ability to negotiate or even compare prices accurately. If Co-op A is giving Farmer Jones a deduction for capital retention that Farmer Smith isn't seeing, but they're both hauling to the same plant, how can they ever know if they are truly getting a fair deal based on the plant's profitability? They can't. They lack the data necessary for any kind of collective action.
Now let's look north of the border to our Canadian friends. Many U.S. farmers suggest that if we had supply management, these structural problems would just disappear. But the Canadian Dairy Information Center data shows that while the mechanism changes, the consolidation pressure does not vanish.
That's a critical insight we must emphasize. Over 2,700 farms have been lost in Canada in the last decade, even under supply management. Why? Because the problem isn't the market mechanism. The problem is the cost of entry and expansion, which supply management simply shifts into the cost of quota.
The choke point there is the quota barrier. It's all about how much quota costs to buy. In Ontario, the quota for 1 kilo of butterfat changes hands for around $24,000. That is an enormous upfront capital barrier.
And when you talk to a young producer near Gulf, their situation is nearly insurmountable. Their dad might have paid $3,000 per kilo for that same quota back in the 90s. The new generation pays $24,000 per kilo or more just to buy in. They start so far behind on cash flow and debt service that survival feels impossible. They are essentially buying their right to produce for a crushing amount of upfront debt.
So whether it's the $7 to $11 per hundredweight COP gap due to finance costs in the U.S., or the $24,000 quota cost debt service in Canada, the pressure point is always capital access and the high structural costs imposed on the entry-level or mid-sized operation. It's the same result. Fewer, bigger operations achieved through different means. The underlying mechanism changes, but that consolidation trend persists globally. Okay, that was the bad news. The system is engineered towards scale. But this deep dive isn't just about identifying problems, it's about finding solutions. Let's look at how producers have teamed up and won, because that offers real hope and provides an actionable blueprint.
This is where we stop grumbling at the coffee shop and start organizing with facts. The IRIC example with Dairygold is a masterclass in modern farmer solidarity and leverage, showing how a few weeks of coordinated effort can reverse massive business decisions.
When Dairygold tried to drop prices, the initial reaction was just frustration. But what they did next was brilliant. Farmers used platforms like WhatsApp and private groups to network and compare pay stubs. And what did they find? Inconsistencies. Same pickup route, same composition, different pay prices or deduction structures.
That's the key. They move from anecdotal rumors, I think I'm getting screwed, to verifiable fact. They found the data discrepancies. They organized simply by asking 600 of their neighbors to bring their last milk check to a meeting. 6 weeks later, 600 farmers were organized, and the results were immediate. Transparency improved, and the planned price cut was rescinded.
The lesson there is facts and solidarity beat rumors and solo grumbling every single time. And that lesson is absolutely applicable right here in the U.S., where pay structures are famously opaque.
It is. I've seen U.S. adaptation tactics working in real time. Producers are becoming savvy auditors. Think about those Midwestern and Central Valley producers who audited their milk checks and truck bills. They didn't just accept the deductions.
They found a specific 20 cents per hundredweight difference for identical hauls on the same routes, which suggested they were subsidizing other, less efficient routes, or that the processor was just pocketing the difference. That is straight cash being unfairly charged.
And because they approached the processor as a collective group, not just one farmer calling in angry with compiled, statistically sound data, they pressed for change and got that 20 cents per hundredweight difference back. If you produce 20,000 hundredweight a month, that's an extra $4,000 back on your check simply by auditing. It's not about producing more milk. It's about stopping the processor from taking the margin.
Beyond operational audits, we have to leverage finance. Remember that $30,000 annual interest penalty. Farm credit advice is straightforward. Renegotiate any credit above prime plus 1. This debt reduction tactic is pure P&L management, not farm management.
If you are above P plus 1, you are paying a penalty for being small or being a perceived risk. But if you have stable operations, you need to use your audited farm data to fight for that rate. You walk into your lender and demand better terms, citing the improved financial resilience you've demonstrated. Dropping 1% on a typical $2 million note saves $20,000 to $25,000 a year.
That is massive. That's more than most farmers make trying to increase their pig milk by 2 pounds. That savings is straight profit, not revenue, profit. And you didn't have to break your back for it.
We've also seen successful strategic shifts that bypass the scale trap entirely, focusing on value added versus raw volume. You stop competing in the commodity arena and start getting paid for differentiation.
The Midwestern farmers bottling their own milk are a great example, accepting the intense labor and compliance burden. Wisconsin extension reports show farm gate price benefits of $2 to $4 a gallon. That completely changes the revenue structure of the farm. Instead of selling a generic commodity, they are selling a finished, differentiated product.
But we have to be honest with our listeners. That shift takes high capital and compliance stamina. We're talking $75,000 to $100,000 just for the initial setup of the bottling plant, refrigeration, and compliance measures like HACCP protocols. It's not a hobby. It's a completely different business model that requires marketing and distribution savvy.
Then you have the niche markets. The Wisconsin herds moving to grass-fed cheese contracts are pulling in a $4 per hundredweight premium. That's huge leverage that completely insulates them from the gyrations of the Class 1 and Class 3 markets. They are moving away from the commodity market entirely by focusing on specific components and feeding protocols.
I love the quote from one of those farmers. We stop competing with 5,000 cow barns by beating them at their game. We get paid for our story and our butterfat. That's the strategic awareness that matters now. They found a market where scale doesn't matter, story, unique composition, and quality do.
It's about finding that crack in the system. You're not trying to produce the cheapest milk, you're trying to produce the most highly valued milk for a specific customer who will pay for the differentiation. That is the only way to overcome the structural deficit.
Let's look ahead, because regulatory and technological changes are only going to sharpen the divide we've discussed between the haves and have-nots unless policy actively changes.
We must analyze how new regulations specifically reward scale. And the perfect contemporary example is California's methane digester rules and the burgeoning renewable natural gas market. They demonstrate exactly how policy unintentionally favors the largest players.
When California fully phased in those rules, digesters became profit centers for large operations. How? They weren't just complying with environmental laws, they were generating highly valuable carbon credits.
Absolutely. A $4 million plus digester is a huge capital investment, but for a 5,000 cow operation, they can easily turn around and trade the RNG credits for north of $1 million a year. They sell these credits in the low-carbon fuel standard markets, essentially getting paid handsomely to prove they are reducing their carbon intensity compared to conventional manure management. They turn a regulatory compliance burden into a sustained, massive revenue stream.
But the small farm, they can't justify the capital investment for a $4 million setup. So they face the compliance cost of manure management without the multi-million-dollar revenue offset. If they can't afford the massive fixed cost of the technology, they are stuck with the high compliance amortization we discussed earlier.
UC Davis economists broke down the unjust cost split. Small farms face $2 per hundredweight for environmental compliance, while the largest are under 50 cents per hundredweight because they monetize the carbon credits. Again, it's not about who manages the manure better, it's about who can afford the capital to transform the manure into a financial product.
It's about who can amortize the cost. Scale allows for amortization of high fixed capital costs, transforming environmental regulation from a compliance expense into an economic advantage for the largest players. It's a regulatory headwind for small farms and a financial tailwind for the large ones.
And if we look at the long-term forecast, the USDA's Economic Research Service projections are pretty brutal if these trends continue. They expect U.S. farm numbers to dip below 10,000 by the mid-2030s. We are losing farms at an unsustainable rate, and the rate of consolidation is accelerating.
And Canada isn't far behind, with numbers expected to drop to 4,000 or 5,000. These projections are based on the continuation of current trends. This is the structural path we are on unless something drastically changes at the policy or producer level, by the regulatory change that favors small farm amortization or massive organized producer leverage.
We need to acknowledge the policy reality. Tom Vilsack, who knows this landscape better than anyone, was quoted at a dairy business roundtable saying, "We love to say we're saving family farms, but policy and business choices keep rewarding bigness and consistency." That's the quiet truth behind Washington rhetoric.
That's the frustrating reality. Policy often aims to protect the concept of the family farm, but the implementation of those policies, be it environmental regulation, commodity pricing mechanisms, or tax codes, often gives the structural advantage back to the biggest players who can afford the compliance or the capital.
So what's the Bullvine's takeaway for this future? The future belongs to those who understand how pricing, processing, and consumer trends intersect, and who find their crack in the system instead of just trying to produce 5 more pounds of milk per cow. That extra 5 pounds won't bridge a $7 to $11 cost gap. Strategic awareness is the new survival skill.
It's about strategic awareness beating production alone. You have to be a business strategist first and a great dairyman second, simply to survive the structural pressures facing you. The old rules are absolutely being rewritten.
All right, a farmer just finished milking and is driving to the feed store right now. They know the reality is tough, but they want action. What are the 3 most critical, immediate things they need to remember from this deep dive on market leverage and scale?
We're going to give them 3 points of immediate, medium, and long-term action. The first one is simple. Know your true position. Calculated honesty. Stop guessing and stop comparing yourself to the neighbor who only talks about his high cow numbers.
Insight 1, know your true position. For your immediate action this week, you need to use hard local benchmarks, not national averages, to calculate your true cost of production. And that absolutely must include family living expenses and full debt service. Accept what the numbers reveal. If your true COP is $32 a hundredweight, you need to own that number and understand where that structural gap is coming from. Is it procurement? Is it finance?
Medium-term strategy, over 3 to 6 months. If that calculated COP is non-competitive against industry leaders, meaning you have that structural gap of $7 to $11, you must stop trying to beat them at their game. Begin investigating one viable, value-added crack. That means initial bottling research or calling specific regional processors about a specialized contract like grass-fed or organic.
And long-term positioning, over 1 to 2 years. Stop focusing capital improvements on raw volume increase. Focus all capital improvements and breeding decisions on maximizing the specific metrics rewarded by your specific new market. If you were going for a high-end cheese contract, your focus is entirely on butterfat and protein percentages, not maximizing bulk tank output volume.
Insight number 2. Audit and alley. Don't go it alone. Solidarity is your only defense against consolidated processors and opaque financial structures.
Insight 2. Audit and alley. Immediate action this week. Gather a handful of trusted neighbors, 5 to 10, and start comparing 2 things right now. 1, loan terms. Are you above prime plus 1? You need to know that number. And 2, milk check deductions, especially the mysterious other deductions and haul costs. Look specifically for that 20 cents per hundredweight difference on identical routes.
Your medium-term strategy for the next 3 to 6 months? If discrepancies are found like that 20 cents difference in hauling, approach the co-op or processor as a group with compiled factual data. You need collective leverage to demand transparency and renegotiate those rates or deductions. Remember the Irish success story. Collective volume is your power.
And the long-term positioning, over 1 to 2 years. If you are able to secure the $20,000 to $30,000 annual savings from debt renegotiation on a typical note, commit that newly freed capital not to expansion, but to cost-saving infrastructure that can be properly amortized, or to investing in your chosen niche market, like that initial bottling setup.
And finally, insight number 3. Strategic awareness beats production alone. You have to think like a processor, not just a producer, to survive the fixed cost penalties.
Insight 3. Strategic awareness. Immediate action for this week. Identify one area where your farm is disproportionately penalized by fixed regulatory costs, like environmental compliance. Calculate its specific cost per hundredweight for your operation, recognizing that $15 per hundredweight penalty we talked about.
Medium-term strategy, 3 to 6 months. Shift your mental focus from simply maximizing volume to maximizing leverage and differentiation. Start conversations with specialty processors about specific premiums, like that $4 per hundredweight grass-fed premium, rather than focusing solely on the general base price discussion. Show them why your milk is worth more than the commodity pool.
And long-term positioning for 1 to 2 years. Build business resilience by ensuring you are paid for your story and butterfat in a niche market. This helps you escape the impossible economics of competing solely on bigness and consistency against operations that buy trainloads of grain and monetize their manure. That is how you survive the new dairy reality.
This has been another Bullvine podcast. For more straight-talking industry analysis, the kind that cuts through the noise and gets you those real, actionable insights, head to www.thebullvine.com.
Subscribe wherever you get podcasts. We're out with new episodes every day, and next time's topic will be analyzing the hidden risks in the current boom cycle for export commodities and whether high overseas prices truly translate into stability for your local milk check. Thank you for joining us. We'll talk to you next time.